Thank you, Randy. Longtime attendee of Free State Foundation conferences up to the very first one. First time moderating. I feel a little bit like a ball player called in from the bullpen, having slogged his way through the Free State Foundation's minor league system. I'll end my baseball analogy because my dad recently reminded me of a game in which senior Little League, I beamed 5 batters from the mound, and they don't let you do that. It wasn't quite ejection, but it was kind of a head shake from the umpire, and you just got to do something else. So, I'm going to turn it over to our panel here. I'll introduce their biographies because they are quite interesting. We have an expert panel here for reactions to everything that we've heard before. We'll be discussing a host of issues. I have James Assey right here, who's Executive Vice President of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. As their second most senior executive, he's involved in all aspects of NCTA's work on behalf of the cable industry. He was a longtime staff member of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And most recently, he was Senior Democratic Counsel to the committee. We also have here Jeffrey Campbell, who's Vice President, the Americas Global Government Affairs for Cisco. That means he leads government affairs Cisco for a tiny area known as the Western Hemisphere. Since 2001, he's been responsible for developing and implementing Cisco's policy with respect to telecom, trade, energy, security, technology, dealing with intellectual property law, internet regulation, energy regulation, international trade, and information technology. And prior to Cisco, Mr. Campbell headed the Government Affairs Office for Combat. We have next is John Carpenter, who's Vice President of Government Affairs at CTIA, the Wireless Association, which he joined in 2006. He's responsible for their strategic direction and day-to-day management of the wireless industry's outreach efforts. I previously worked in the Washington, D.C. office of AT&T, and prior to that, the Telecommunications Industry Association. And I've also got Peter Davidson, Senior Vice President, Federal Government Relations at Verizon. Mr. Davidson's responsible for federal government policy and advocacy matters affecting government relations with Congress and the executive branch. Before that, he was General Counsel at the United States Trade Representative. And we also have with us today, I'm quite pleased to have Gene Kimmelman, President and CEO of Public Knowledge. A very distinguished background, he served as Director of Internet Freedom and Human Rights Project with New America Foundation, and as Chief Counsel for the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division. He's presently a Senior Fellow at the Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship, University of Colorado, and Senior Associate with Global Partners Digital. So, for those who maybe been here at the conference and hearing the speakers before, the net neutrality Title II order by the FCC has been sort of the primary topic of discussion, but certainly not the only one. Does anyone have any reactions at the outset to anything that's been said before? The prior panel? How about this? Actually, I'll just take it from Commissioner Olhausen's presentation. Is there any reaction that you might have to the issue of the common carrier exception in the FTC and who might be perhaps the most suitable entity for addressing these kinds of issues? And perhaps that's a hedged question, but perhaps someone in the panel would like to take that. John, would you like to perhaps take a stab at that?
Seth? Sure, happy to lead. At CTIA, we've traditionally viewed the common carrier exemption as a useful bar against duplicative regulation. Yes, as Commissioner Olhausen points out, the market is dramatically different today than when that initiative or that piece of law was enacted. We have competition where we used to have monopoly, but because we have competition, our view is we don't need a lot of regulation. If we're going to have a regulator at the federal level, we ought to have a regulator, not multiple regulators. And so when the FTC and others have proposed in the past removing that restriction and allowing the FTC authority over common carriers, it's been our view that if you're going to do that, you need to couple that with some consequent reduction in the scope of the authority of the FCC. And in fact, it's not even today a question of dual regulation. We have dueling 3-letter agencies, and we now have this 4-letter agency on the scene in the form of the CFPB that wants into the space as well. And I don't think anybody in the space objects to having some baseline level of sensible regulation. But I don't know how you get a sensible baseline with 2 or 3 regulators. I think that just simply raises the likelihood that you'll have duplication and overlap and conflict. And I don't think that serves anybody's interests.
Seth, could I add something to what Jod said? And I think,
go ahead.
Sometimes I think everyone gets caught up in exactly which agency should be doing what. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of wastes a lot of time and energy and heat in the wrong direction. I think I'd like to move up a little higher. I agree with everything Jod said, but move up a little higher and say, okay, given that, what is the type of policy making that should be happening? And in a dynamic economy like we have today, with technology moving as quickly as it is moving, I think the way that, regardless of who's doing it, the way that they do it is really important. And so having, whether it's technology mandates in law, or whether you have inflexible silos in regulations, and whether it takes 18 months to change that regulation. These are all yesterday's news by the time we actually get to harm to consumer or harm to competition at the end of the day. So what you have to do, and this is, I think, what Congress is supposed to do, is kind of look at the big policy implications here and redesign the system for the internet age in a way that puts out some general principles of consumer protection and protection of competition, and then have a relatively flexible process of bringing complaints, and then having those complaints adjudicated in a quick manner, quick and thorough manner, and then you kind of create a common law of the internet ecosystem, and you go from there. So, which 3-letter agency that is, I leave for smarter people to determine, but I think the process needs to be more aligned with where technology and internet ecosystem is today.
Peter makes a good point here on this, which is that we need to have one system here. But if you look at the rationale in the FCC order for why we must have such stringent rules, to preserve an open internet, almost to the extent that in order to preserve a permissionless innovation, we must ban permissionless innovation in other spaces. The rationale is that it's too difficult to do on a case-by-case basis, that we have to have bright line rules that people know in advance and whatnot. Of course, we'll enforce them on a case-by-case basis afterward. But my point is that it's actually in direct contradiction with how the FTC goes about its ordinary operation for consumer protection and the other things that are under its jurisdiction, where it's a fact-based intensive investigation, and then you get a bunch of case-by-case decisions to put that case law together. And so, wherever you go, the rationales seem to be in great tension here to see what's going on. And I think the worst thing we could do for the industry is to have a world of, well, if I can't get you one way, I'm going to get you another way. I think we have to have a basis that people understand how new services, new offerings that will be brought to market are going to be reviewed by regulators, and get to an ability to have some understanding of what the rules are going to be and what people have to do.
Yeah, Gene, go ahead.
So this is a great place for me to jump in, because it's my best opportunity to agree with everyone. There may be more, we'll see, but this is a good starting point. I totally agree with everything John and Peter said, and Jeff had some good points. I think staying high level, getting principles, it's not about which acronym it is, it's getting the right functions dealt with by government where you need government, leave it to the market where you don't need government, and make it as simple as possible. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. Now, Peter, you mentioned redesigning the system for consumer protection, but there's been part of a broader congressional effort in terms of redesigning the entire Communications Act. And in the prior panel, of course, former Congressman Boucher brought up the possibility of a legislative compromise around 706. So those are a couple of avenues that sort of stand out there in terms of what's next after the Title II order. James, perhaps you could start with us. What are your thoughts in terms of the next steps ahead in terms of either legislative compromise or the impact that the Title II order might have on getting us a reform toward a digital age communications act, whether that would increase the need for it, could it set things back? Give us your take.
Well, I don't know if my take is particularly unique. I mean, I think, on the one hand, I think at yesterday's Senate Commerce hearing, I was encouraged by the number of people who seemed to recognize that a legislative path might be in everyone's best interests as we're staring into the abyss of a lot of litigation and collateral damage. I do think there are only so many things, I think Congress can do at one time. I think, if you're talking about a broader rewrite versus essentially fixing or codifying whatever your perspective is on the net neutrality, open internet principles that are currently at issue, whether that speeds up or slows down more comprehensive reform, I don't know. But, I think to go back to kind of the initial question, I think what we see and what we've talked about at conferences like this for it seems like forever is the fact that the statute is very focused on silos. I mean, it is a historical anachronism that basically used to cabin off different firms who used to not compete with one another, and now we find that competition is rampant not only across these artificial divisions, but even upwards into the stack. It's one of the reasons that you want a single regulator to regulate all the people who are dealing with the affected information or concerns that the government is going to have. So I think more than net neutrality, whether or not there's a spur or slows down more comprehensive reform, I think at the end of the day it's the market transformation which continues to put pressure and drive people towards a greater sensitivity to the need for a more modern framework that will reflect the state of competition and the variety of players who are currently participating within the overall ecosystem.
So I had a thought to that, Seth. So you almost asked us whether there's something in the previous panels and presentations that struck a nerve with us. And so I want to combine that almost question with your last question, because I think what Chairman Walden said about bad policy making bad, or bad process making bad policy is right. Back in my teens, I was involved in a legislative effort called the Contract with America, and we got all 10 planks of the contract through the House of Representatives in 93 days. And believe me, we cut some corners. We had all the members of the House were candidates had pledged in writing to vote on these 10 planks within 100 days, and they did it. And we got very little bipartisan buy-in to many of the provisions because when we were obligated to follow this process, but that was not the right way to do it in terms of bringing people on board. What you want to do is you want to have, and sometimes the sausage-making machine of Congress is ugly and it produces not very good results at the end of the day. It's a compromise and you might not be happy, but it does a couple things. First of all, it exposes the authors to different points of view that they or their small circle of advisors may not have thought of. It requires you to defend that product against those same groups of people. And as you go through the vetting process, you improve that product. And then thirdly, and most important, it creates buy-in from all of those who participate in the process. So even though it's not everything you wanted, you are now you're a parent of this, and you have skin in the game and you have buy-in. So when I think about the process that we just went through with the net neutrality order, and kind of how ugly that was in a lot of ways, I think that, I think about what kind of odds Nate Silver would give to this order being intact in, say, 5 years. And I would have to imagine that it would be less than 20%. So Rick Boucher's point about the leverage that Republicans and Democrats right now have kind of an equilibrium of leverage or lack of leverage, however you look at that, this actually is the right time for them to look at this process and create a good process. And I think so far, there's some back and forth on this, but I think there's been a thoughtful process of the white papers in the House. We're doing roundtable meetings in the Senate that are going on now. And I think that kind of careful process could result in some kind of bipartisan policy that Nate Silver would give, more of a 80 or 90% chance of being around in 5 years rather than 20% chance.
Okay. Jeff, did you have a response on that? Or did I catch you? Did I misunderstand you? I have a different question for you, though.
Okay.
Okay, how about this, that we move on to the let's just sticking with the order itself. I mean, what's in terms of, there's this process that it sets up for advisory opinions, and we had some discussion on this earlier, and I would like someone on the panel to opine on that. And that is what they might think this sort of process of getting new services and things cleared through an advisory opinion, an optional advisory opinion you could go to the FCC as part of the rules. What impact might that have on innovation? I mean, we've seen the term permissionless innovation come into use a lot lately. I don't know if Adam Thier at least gets bonus points for raising it. That's the term that kind of sticks to my mind when I think of that process, even if it has an unintended consequence. Anyone care to opine on that?
Sure. Sure,
Right.
Jeff.
Sure, I'll start. I think, I'm not going to knock the idea of advisory opinions. I mean, it's better than not having it as an option, and that might actually be some improvement here. But I think the reality of how technology is developed and deployed and rolled out will demonstrate that it's mostly cold comfort on this front. I mean, to get to a point of fully understanding how a service might be offered and operated, you have to go through developing the technology. You have to develop the equipment, the software, and all the things that are going to support that technology. You have to then figure out what your business case is for it, what consumers want, what people might be willing to pay for it, because things aren't magic. They don't happen for free. And at that point in time, you could go and get an advisory opinion on it. But the bulk of the investment of what it takes to offer that new service is already going to have been spent long before you're in a position to know what question you want to ask the FCC. Can I do this? Can I do that? So I'm not really sure that the advisory opinion process is really going to help a lot for this problem. And I think what we've done in this order, and it's something that I think is important for the Congress to be thinking about too as they look at this issue, is in one sector we have said that there will be no permissionless innovation, and in fact you had better watch anything you do in this section, which is providing services as a internet access provider, doing things inside the network, in the technology itself. And we're going to watch everything you do, we're suspicious of anything that you do, and we're probably going to tell you that you can't do it at the end of the day. And I think we've removed this whole sector of what drives the internet economy and said, no innovation here, because we're worried that there might be problems with innovation elsewhere. And I think it's an enormous overreaction that's going to impact R&D spending and where people are going to put their energy, and the desire of people who run networks to bring new services to market, because it costs a lot of money to do this, and if you hit a point where somebody says you just can't do it, all of those costs become sunk costs.
I think that's a great answer. I would add that, certainly in the wireless space, which is vibrantly competitive, and I think that's apparent to everybody who works outside the portals at least. If you look at the last 6 months of last year, the number of plan and service and feature offering changes that came to market as competitors responded to each other in order to try to win share was tremendous. And it was all aimed at, how do I capture consumers' attention? How do I convince someone to spend money on my network, with my plan, with my device, with my features. And the idea now that somehow you're supposed to go and seek, in essence, prior approval from the commission before you think about making those kinds of changes is exactly at odds with the way a competitive market is supposed to work. It just baffles me to think that in the face of very clear evidence that the market is vibrant and innovative and delivering really good results to consumers, we now want to set up a process that says, go ask Mother May I before you bring new plans to market. I just don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it's something that most members at CTIA are going to want to avail themselves of. And I think it will inevitably slow the process down.
I think one other thing, and I don't, advisory opinions may have, I certainly think have merits in the right context. And, if you read the order, I think, and you read through the footnotes, I guess, in that section, which I admit I've skimmed through, I mean, it's pretty clear that they're trying to set up some type of parallel, analogous process to the business letters that people go and get before justice. But, I think what that highlights is the advisory opinion or the business letter is really only as good as the standard that you're trying to enforce. And at least in the antitrust context, we have guidelines, we have a host of precedential, precedent that tells us, basically whether or not we're kind of within the zone of wanting to go in and get confirmation. I don't know what to make of the general conduct standard. I mean, it's exceedingly difficult, I think, for anyone, as Jot says, to know what way the FCC is going to come out on any particular practice or service innovation that may come along, and that's what kind of leads to this this concern about this Mother May I approach to innovation. So whether or not folks will avail themselves of, I don't know, but I think we're unlikely to see the benefits of advisory opinions bear fruit unless we get a standard that gives us some greater predictability about what's in and what's out of the zone of reasonableness.
It may end up like the IRS process. You'll probably see the stories in the next couple of weeks because you see them every year about constituents who call the IRS with a tax question, and you can call 10 times and you get 9 different answers because the answer is highly dependent on who you get on the other end of the line. I don't know how you get consistency in this process. Is there a risk that a business plan is okay if competitor A brings it forward, but if competitor B brings it forward, it's not okay? I don't know how you're going to work through that process.
All right, now James mentioned the general conduct standard of Title II order. So keeping that in mind, and as well the prohibitions on paid prioritization, I'm going to bring Gene in on this and ask, Gene, where do, in light of the provisions on the general conduct standard and the no paid prioritization, what's the future of zero rating plans under this, or where should those fall? In addition, perhaps even arrangements between, say, cable providers and third-party video devices, such as Comcast Xbox, where the data streamed to the Xbox wouldn't otherwise count in the service plan. So how do you see those kinds of services? What's the future of those and the standards, or what do you think it should be?
Well, I think that we don't know, and if we were talking about the description that Rick Boucher gave of 706, I would say we don't know. If we were talking about what was the law of the land for the last 10 years, I would say we don't know. And I can go back further because each one of these, in any one of those frameworks, has been very fact-specific. In some instances, particularly on the antitrust side, it relates to whether it's someone exercising market power or not and how concentrated the market is. On the FCC side, there have been a variety of other factors that have played in. So I don't think, but my guess, if I, just purely conjectural, is that there is no absolute answer on whether it's zero rating or any one of the relationships you described. I think it's going to play out probably more similarly than differently than what it has during much of the last 10 years. The words are somewhat different, but a lot of what we've been operating under has been either a precise set of parameters of what discrimination is or a set of concerns about regulators likely to step in if someone goes too far this way or that way. I seriously doubt it's going to be very different.
So Seth, could I just, and so Gene, if just take as an example, and I know we don't have all the facts around this, but so say you have Netflix zero rating plan that they're rolling out in Australia now. So, and I don't know what the business deal is there, but basically a couple weeks after they've filed all of their petitions on the net neutrality order in favor of Title II, and they went out and said that, and then their CFO came and said, no, they really don't like Title II, but then they came back and said, well, I guess we were wrong, he misspoke, we do. And then the last thing they did was do a zero rating deal in Australia and said, well, never mind that, that's not what we're talking about. But if they were to do that in the United States, should they be treated differently than, say, Bright House Communications or Amazon or someone else that does some kind of, or T-Mobile that has a zero rating music streaming service? I mean, how would this rule apply to those different situations, and how do we determine who can do zero rating and who can't?
And is it hemisphere specific?
Well, the one thing I know I can certainly answer is Australia has nothing to do with it, so I think it is specific. I mean, again, what happens in other countries based on other legal frameworks, constitutional and statutory, is a whole different ballgame. And we could do India, we could do a whole lot of countries
Right.
that way.
But if they did it here?
Yeah, so I think the commission has laid out a framework, and I think it will be the same analysis, whether it's Amazon, Netflix, Verizon, or Comcast, as probably what you would have seen with something that was 706 based, or what you would have seen in applying Kevin Martin's principles and Michael Powell's principles. It might apply somewhat differently. We've seen that for the ages with different commissions having different interpretations. I think the fundamental factors are going to be the same thing. You know, what is reasonable discrimination in the marketplace that is acceptable? We have loss leaders, we have discounting, we have a lot of different things throughout our marketplace. We've had it throughout telecommunications for as long as I've been doing it. I don't think the internet's going to be that different. I think it's going to be a question of whether there's some unique attributes about it that are more like the kinds of concerns about blocking and throttling and harm to competition that I think are the central features of whether you're doing Title II or you were doing 706, everyone was looking at.
Okay, I'm going to direct this question to you, Jeff, and I'll want your take on this as well, Gene. Moving on from net neutrality and Title II for a little bit, one of the things that we've seen in the last year is Congress putting an end to the FCC's integration ban on video devices. In other words, the regulation that even prohibited video devices from downloading security without at least getting a waiver from the FCC. So that's been done away with, and there's now the FCC has set up the Downloadable Security Technology Committee. I mean, what is it you hope to see out of that committee? I know it has a report that's supposed to come out within the next several months. I mean, in terms of the future of video device regulation, I mean, we're in sort of a post-cable card world, or at least going to be moving to something like that, perhaps. I mean, what would you like to see?
Well, I think we have to recognize where we are and where we're going and what the technology and market developments are in this space. I mean, to some extent, whatever your view on cable card was or is, it did achieve what it was intended to achieve in its implementation, which is that it's a method by which third-party devices can connect to cable systems and other multi-channel video systems and give the content security that it requires and make it available to third-party devices. It has dramatically changed the equipment market in that space. It has also dramatically reduced the cost of equipment in that space. All of that has been accomplished, and all of those obligations still sit on all of the same companies, and that continues regardless. But the reality is that technology has gone far beyond this, and we're looking at a much more application-centric and software-centric world in which consumers are no longer just consuming based on linear video delivery. They're not consuming based upon, one TV kind of device or two TV kind of device, but multiple devices connected through multiple ways, sharing content across different platforms. And so, the good news is that all these technological advancements actually bring software and app-based systems into this world where we can do downloadable security, including multiple types of security, multiple types of devices that can actually provide better security because you have more renewable systems. You'll have methods of both allowing different kind of devices to access the content and better security for the content itself. So, I mean, if the committee focuses on its task that Congress has assigned to it to figure out a report on how to move to that world, I think we'll have a pretty good result out of this. But the result is going to be look less like what the cable card world which was one solution for everybody everywhere, into a world where with downloadable security and different kind of software, you can have multiple systems that are interoperable with multiple systems, which is where the world is going.
Yeah, Gene.
No, I think Jeff makes great points on that, and I kind of think of this one the same way Peter described legislation. What are the principles we're trying to get at? So security is one key element of it. One of the real disappointments from a consumer side has been that a lot of the experience in the evolution of the cable industry has been way too much like that black phone up there, where it was that set-top box, you had to have that box. That was the box. You needed it. It was like the old black phone. And we're not in that technological era, and I'm hoping this committee can address that. I think what consumers want is the ability to choose as many devices as possible that serve the functions and needs they have that can work on the transmission coming in, and open this market to more competition. That would be a wonderful thing.
Could I have just one comment on that too? And I agree with Gene. I mean, I think this is kind of yesterday's news. We're solving a problem that I think consumers have long passed by. And so I hope it's not fighting yesterday's wars. I think everyone's already choosing all kinds of different delivery devices, and their over-the-top video is exploding. And so I'm not sure that it's worth a whole lot of time figuring out how to figure out the old technology. What's really happening in a lot of ways now, the gating factors are not the old black boxes sitting on top of the one way you can get video. It's access to content. It's the price of content. It's getting content to as many different places on as many different devices as we can. So that's some of the issues as we become an over-the-top provider, and that's really where we're looking at doing a lot of our video delivery, is finding it very difficult to aggregate the content, whether it's property rights or whether it's the actual costs of the content. That's going to stop innovation in this space, and that's going to hurt consumers a lot more than anything else. So, I'm not arguing for a technology mandate in any way here. I think those are bad, and those freeze in policies for today's or yesterday's problems and not tomorrow's. But I think policymakers should be looking at those set of issues to make sure that consumers are able to access as much content as they can wherever they want.
Yeah, well, sticking with the over-the-top video for a second. I mean, Gene, I know public knowledge has been very interested in the FCC's now underway proceeding to redefine MVPD, multi-video programming distributors, to include certain over-the-top video subscriptions. About that, I mean, what is it? Where's that going to take us exactly? I mean, this is a system that was set up with program access and those things that had a specific, at least at the beginning, cable model in mind, 92 Cable Act and those things, and this is a very different world. I mean, what is it you're looking for here in this proceeding, and what makes public knowledge look forward to this?
It's incremental change. It doesn't get at the deeper issues, because I again agree with Peter's one of the first statements was we shouldn't be doing technology mandates, we shouldn't be doing things technology specific. One of our problems is that Title VI of the Communications Act is loaded with that, because that's what we did in 1992. We thought about satellite delivery, we thought about cable delivery, and we were way too specific in drafting laws. So I think this is a very small step. It's trying to make the programming more available for a form of distribution that we wouldn't have known of in the early 90s, but it is very similar. But it doesn't get at the fundamental problem of, what this marketplace should be looking like in 2015.
And also, Randy, as you interview Congressman Scalise over lunch, you might want to ask him this exact question, because he has been the lead sponsor in Congress on video reform legislation that is kind of looking at the whole system in a more modern way. What are the issues that are around today, trying to get rid of the silos and deal with some of the gating issues that I talked about before. Interestingly, as we talk about bipartisanship, Congressman Scalise and Congresswoman Assey were exploring ways that they could work together. I think both of them saw the problems that are going to be facing consumers with the siloed video system. I don't know that they actually found a unified way to deal with them, but I think they both agree that there was a problem. And in the last Congress, we're exploring ways to move legislation. So when we talk about broad modernization legislation in Congress, I don't know if this is a chapter of that or if this is a separate bill that moves through Congress, but it's definitely worthy of policymakers' attention.
Okay.
I think one thing, and Seth, I'd probably be remiss if I didn't also just note the work that you and Randy have done on pointing out some of the problems with the cable card and finally seeing that provision in the law sunset. But whether you're talking about the sunset of that obligation or the DSTAC report or the MVPD item, I think all of this is dredging up. I think what Gene mentioned, that in 1992, cable was it, when it came to pay TV video, pretty much. And we don't live in that world. I mean, you can't go back through the paper in the last week without seeing an article about Sony launching its over-the-top service or Apple coming out with its over-the-top service. So, and that's great from a consumer perspective, but I think all that does is hang a lantern on what are going to be the rights and responsibilities of people who are providing those types of services, because the title that we have in Title VI now doesn't treat everyone equally. So I think all of these issues highlight that. I was at least encouraged, I think, by the action that was taken as part of Stellar, because, to the DSTAC report, Congress directed the FCC to focus on technologically neutral and platform agnostic solutions to downloadable security. I do think they have a very short window to accomplish something. But we're hopeful that if we stay focused and we stay on track, the report that the panel produces will at least be informative, I think, of the developments that are taking place in the marketplace today.
Okay. John, I wanted to take it over to you and ask you about the spectrum auctions and
Reform.
particularly the broadcast incentive auction that we have ongoing. I mean, what are in your mind the critical policy decisions that need to be made in the very, very short term to see this thing through?
I think in that respect, I want to associate myself with the comments that Ajit made when he was here earlier. If you listen to Commissioner Pai talk about the incentive auction, he talked about the real need to make sure that both the participants in the reverse auction and in the forward auction have as much information about the way the FCC is going to conduct these proceedings as possible. The broadcasters need it because they've never been through a process like this before. Wireless providers have a fair degree of experience in dealing with auctions, auction policy. This is a first for the broadcasters. They've got to feel comfortable, because if there's not a successful reverse auction, there is no forward auction opportunity. And at the same time, we've learned through the last couple of big spectrum auctions that have benefited CTIA's members and others, that the more information the government can push out on the front end of the auction, the more informed judgments would-be bidders can make about bidding strategy, about participation strategy. And so I think those questions need to be asked and answered, and I'm a little dismayed that they haven't already been dealt with. Again, Commissioner Pai made the point that you hoped with muni broadband and net neutrality sort of now, at least for them, in the rearview mirror, maybe in the front windshield for others of us, but in the rearview mirror for them, they can turn more attention to the incentive auction proceeding. And I'm a little dismayed that we got sort of out of order there, because the incentive auction was a statutorily directed process. The other two projects I would suggest were optional. I'm hopeful that the commission can get back to sort of a laser focus on the incentive auction. There's a ton of work to do if we're going to hit Tom Wheeler's stated goal of first quarter 2016. And so they really need to get busy.
Okay. Well, we're going to be taking questions from the audience in just a
Seth,
bit.
could I add just one thing onto Josh's
Sure, so be
question?
thinking
I'm
of
sorry.
one for now.
Yeah.
And I'll turn to Peter.
I'll give you time to think.
All right.
Because I think this auction question, John's exactly right in this upcoming auction, but this is a very unique auction. I'd like to make a couple points. One, I think there's going to be a tremendous need for more spectrum going forward for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So another aspect of whatever the modernization legislation in Congress should be is some kind of spectrum modernization provision that deals with identifying more government-owned spectrum and finding ways to get that out, licensed, unlicensed, Wi-Fi, whatever. We should have a 10-year pipeline or a 15-year pipeline of spectrum that we can identify. And with advances in technology, that shouldn't be that hard to do. And I'm all in favor of trying to identify some kind of government incentive program, because I think people work best with incentives. And I think there are some ways to do that. And secondly, when you're talking about auctions going forward, and not just this one, I think it's very important that policymakers design these auctions in a way that is competitor neutral. What we've seen with the Dish DE debacle this last time, which is who knows how long that's going to take to unwind what's going on there. And you've had many instances of manipulation of the rules to favor one bidder over another, sometimes for the best of purposes, but it always ends up being a disaster. And I think that going forward, if Congress is looking at this, they should write out some clear rules for how those auctions should be run. And the FCC should, on their own, be looking at rules to not manipulate the outcomes for one or another, because unintended consequences always end up messing things up, and then we have spectrum that should be used for consumers' benefit that's lying fallow, and you get taxpayers that are missing out on billions of dollars of money that should be flowing back to the Treasury. And it's just a lose-lose-lose situation when there's that kind of manipulation of the auctions.
Okay. Right before I get to questions here, I just want to sneak in one more question, and I'll pose this to Gene. You talked about incremental changes earlier, and I'll put this in the context of the IP transition or the technology transition that's taking place. I mean, what kind of incremental changes, policy-wise at the federal and state level, would you like to see continue or begin to further that process?
Well, I think that the commission is going down a good path here. I think laying out the principles you're trying to accomplish is always the starting point, because the technology is not something they should be delving into the details of. It should be as neutral as possible. It should be identifying what needs to be done. The things that jump out to us that we think need to be resolved are what are the elements of the traditional network that we've come to rely on: emergency services, making sure a fax machine works if you're still using a fax machine. Just these basic, transitional things that one would expect a telecommunications network to be able to handle, that we think is good for the society. It's really the nuts and bolts of that I think are most fundamental here. That as we experiment with new technologies, as let the industry grow and compete as it best can, that we're not losing some of the fundamental principles and goals that we believe a commonly used network should sustain.
All right, well, we'll turn this over to the audience. If you have questions, we have microphones. My colleague Kathy is holding one of them right there, and it looks like we have a question here.
I'm still hearing on from communications. I'd like to add two words: the future of the Internet of Things, or Jeff, your company calls it the Internet of Everything. Certainly there's a lot of policy issues related to where where that's going, FTC's recent report. Can you guys talk at all about where you think the policy hot-buttons are going to be and what kind of outlook we have for the activity on this? I think Cisco just predicted that we're going to go from 15 billion to 50 billion Internet of Things devices, everything devices in the next 5 years.
Yes, I think Internet of Things, or as we like to think of it as Internet of Everything, because it's actually more than things, it's people interacting with things, is going to be a huge driver in the technology space going forward. It's going to affect all aspects of it and create a lot of new markets and new features and opportunities. From a policy perspective, I actually think thinking of it as a policy space is the wrong way to look at it. You should actually recognize that it's just another way of doing things that we have done before. And so the policy issues largely don't change. So if you're working with medical devices, there are lots of concerns there about efficacy, safety, that the medical world has always dealt with, and those things will still apply there. Privacy obviously is going to be a big concern in this area, but it's not just something you can say, how do you deal with privacy in the Internet of Things? It depends what you're doing. If I'm plowing chips into the fields of North Dakota to measure pesticide, fertilizer, and moisture levels, I don't think there's a big privacy issue with that kind of application versus if someone has a home health care monitoring system that's communicating that. And so I think the key policy thing to think of here is that we shouldn't think about creating new. We should think about how do we deal with the specific applications that people are creating in this area and whether there are policy implications and appropriate safeguards for consumers that need to be implemented. And if we think about it that way, we'll actually be much more effective at addressing the policy concerns, but we'll also do it in a way that allows the business to flourish and grow.
Just add one more thing on the privacy point. I think the FCC's recent net neutrality order specifically includes Section 222 privacy issues, and they have a workshop that's going on. And so I think it's yet to be seen to the extent that these rules are applied by the FCC. The old rules are applied to new technologies, whether it be Internet of Things or edge services. Is something that I think edge providers and Internet of Everything people should be paying very close attention to, because those old rules could be attempting to retrofit them to anyone who operates in the Internet ecosystem.
All right, we have a question over here at the press table.
Thank you. Lydia Bayou with Bloomberg DNA. To your remarks, Congressman Malone just released a bill to require the FCC to modify and update its competitive bidding processes. I think it's safe to assume that that's aimed at DISH's use of designated entities. Can any of you comment on how you would like to see the competitive bidding processes and specifically the TV program modified ahead of the upcoming auctions?
Peter, since I've got members big, small, and in between who have a variety of thoughts on that, I'm going to let you go first.
Profiles encouraged, Jot.
I'm with my members every step away, right behind them.
Right. Well, I think Congressman Pallone has been part of a chorus of members of Congress over the last couple days that I think have been alarmed at what happened in the most recent auction, and particularly the DISH kind of manipulation of the DE process for its own purposes. Senator McCaskill yesterday, Senator Ayotte, Congressman Pallone, Commissioner Pai has been particularly eloquent in kind of describing the issues here. So, I think we know what not to do. How they deal with that situation is a whole other question, but I think I don't have a specific recommendation on how to do it. I think Congress needs to look into it, and as I said earlier, I think this could be a part of a broader reform that's dealing with spectrum issues more broadly, and that creates some more bright line rules for how auctions should be implemented so that we actually get the spectrum in use to consumers efficiently, and we return the highest amount of revenues to the Treasury for the taxpayers. And those are all win-win situations. And if there's some way to do some incentives along the way, then that might be useful for government agencies to spur them along to identify more spectrum that they control as well. So I think this is one area of all the issues we're talking about where it truly is a win-win-win scenario if Congress can step in and figure out how to make this work better.
Can I just say, there's a big if there at the end, Peter, because what we always come back to whenever this comes up is it's not just money for the Treasury, it's are you also doing competition policy through auctions? And this has always been the debate that has led to a lot of complexity around this issue. So it's fundamentally, what are you trying to accomplish in the auction? And if you're trying to drive more competition, then we get into, or you're trying to divide more diversity of ownership. I mean, you get into all of these complexities in one way or another. So I think the key there is, what is the overarching goal that Congress is trying to achieve?
Okay, we have a question over here.
Thank you. Crystal Howard with Politics 365. So I think this is apropos, this is the industry panel, right? So I think a lot of what happened around the net neutrality battle and where we ended up with the rule really had to do with popularity when you start thinking about kind of consumer sentiment. Knowing that and understanding that a lot of people who were vocal advocates for a hard Title II route have no idea what Title II actually means or does. What role do you think that FCC ought to play going forward in terms of really making sure people are educated about the issues and understanding, like weighing appropriately, okay, these people don't really know what they're talking about, or there's a misconception about the issues. If we're talking about FCC reform, how can the commission do a better job of educating people so that it's an informed decision-making process?
That's a great question.
It's a tough question. I think part of it is reminding the FCC, as I suspect Chairman Walden is probably right about now, that proceedings are supposed to be explorations of the Commission's statutory authority, not popularity contests. And it doesn't matter whether they got 2 comments or 4 million comments. This wasn't supposed to be about volume of comments. It's supposed to be about what are the bounds of their statutory limits. And I think it's certainly arguable that some people forgot that sort of central mooring post. That doesn't mean that people who don't know what they're talking about shouldn't be able to weigh in. It's an inherent part of a free and open society that we let everybody participate in the system. But you'd hope that the expert agency would filter through those comments and discern the serious from the unserious and the informed from the perhaps less informed.
Can I say, I agree with John, it shouldn't be the number of comments. But 2 other things just to point out. If you look at people who participated somehow in this proceeding and yelled out Title II or yelled at anything, I would just like to point out there are an awful lot of people who believe they are thoroughly schooled in Title II who I'm not sure know what Title II means. So I would not, it goes both ways there in terms of the very expert versus the people who have never maybe read the Communications Act. But I think on a more serious note, the important thing there is not what words they said, is what were they trying to express. And I think that whether it's a lot of individual commenters or a lot of the experts in the proceeding, there is a fundamental consensus in the society that there are certain kinds of discrimination we should not have in networks. And then there's ambiguity about what the dividing line is. And I think that's fundamental to not forget here, that there's probably a lot more agreement than disagreement besides the way it was expressed in this proceeding that really does serve as a baseline for how the markets have worked and I think how they will work in the coming years.
Okay. Just to add to that too, I think it's a great question, but I actually think it kind of brings us back again to the legislative arena too, because there has been I think, a very good process so far, going back probably about a year ago. The House started the white paper exercise, asking for comments on, I think, 7 or 8 they've had now. Senate's going through the roundtable discussions with various parts of industry, consumer advocates, and others to try to figure out what is the problem. So I actually agree with Gene, is that there is, although there's kind of a demonstrable lack of evidence of existing problems, as I think the congressional hearings over the last couple days have demonstrated, there really isn't a lot of evidence of harm today, but clearly there is concern about harm in the future, and I think there's some anxiety, I mean, free-floating anxiety about what might happen, but it is there. And so I think Congress can undertake a thoughtful legislative process that pulls in comments from everybody, that has a transparent, serious legislative effort to craft legislation that answers those concerns with specificity, but that also is going to have to be flexible enough going forward to account for unknown problems. If there's bad actors doing things that we don't know about today, those rules have to be flexible enough to deal with that. And that's the issue. So the Republicans have put down 4 specific areas that they're willing to go forward on, and the Democrats have said that's not enough, because we need to have some kind of flexibility going forward to deal with unknown issues today. And so that's where the discussion is going to be going on in Congress, and I hope that over the next year they can undertake that exercise, and that at the end of it, that 4 million people or 300 million people are satisfied that we have a internet governance regime in place that will not stifle innovation and investment, but that will also deal with bad actors in the internet space.
You know, I think one of the problems here too is that when you reduce the debate to sort of bumper sticker slogans, whether it's Title II, I'll pick a different one than the Title II one. I'll pick paid prioritization. I mean, that became a bumper sticker as well. And it was both analyzed by almost everyone, including many people who consider themselves to be experts, technologically wrong, people who do not understand how the networks actually work. Every time I heard the phrase fast lanes and slow lanes, I wanted to like scream, because that is not technically how the internet works. Yet FCC commissioners who all knew better kept using that phrase over and over and over again. And so we took something that is a situation that has a lot of ambiguity into it. I can see many instances where paid prioritization can cause a lot of consumer harm and can impact competition. And I can also see a lot of instances where paid prioritization can provide for a new and innovative service. And we bumper stickered it, and it had to either be good or bad. And the commission came to the conclusion that it was bad, instead of realizing that there's a lot of shades of gray in all of this. And I think we really lost, you know, the commission's job of being an expert agency in this process of discerning the shades of gray.
Yes, we have a question right here in the middle in the back.
John Blake. I was very interested in Mr. Carpenter's comment that unless the first auction involving broadcasters surrendering spectrum works, there won't be a second spectrum. There won't be a second auction. And one of the things that's always puzzled me is, what is the incentive in incentive auction? It doesn't seem to me that a television station that's worth $10 million has an incentive to put its spectrum up for auction if the limit that it can get is $10 million. And one of the problems you pointed out was the fact that the commission hasn't really spelled out how that's going to work. You have this statute that says that the proceeds can go to the Treasury, it can go to the broadcast station, and then it will go to compensating the commission for the expenses that's incurred in connection with the auction. It seems, and the point that hasn't been resolved seems to me leaves this unclear to the broadcaster whether they want to participate or not. And I wonder whether there isn't a possibility here of those who have interest in both ends of the spectrum can't get together in order to persuade the commission to resolve those issues so that the stepping stone that you outlined can go forward effectively.
I think there's actually a lot of that going on right now. NAB and CTIA and the Expanded Opportunities for Broadcasters Coalition and other interested parties have been spending a lot of time together trying to work through whether there are areas of mutual agreement. Where there are, we've tried to go to the commission, put those on the record, urge the commission to take yes for an answer. Where you have industry agreement, there's a roadmap forward, because we recognize very clearly that if there aren't broadcasters willing to part with spectrum, then there's no spectrum for our members to go and acquire. Now the incentive, it's money, it's opportunity. They recognize, I think, at a macro level, that they have a dramatically changing marketplace in their space. At the same time, they want to be able to monetize those assets, and that's what the incentive auction is supposed to enable them to do. And so, as I said, the commission's got a heck of a lot of work to do in the next 6 to 12 months if they're going to come anywhere close to hitting that stated calendar target. We'd like them to hit the target. On the other hand, they get a single shot at this. It is more important to do it right than it is to do it fast.
Does the commission understand this concern?
That's a good question for the commission.
Okay, I think John.
I bet they're getting that right now on the Hill.
John, thanks for that question, and more like John has been a leading light in the communications market for so many years, and we appreciate you and people like you for being here and asking questions like that. So to stay on schedule, but we did get in some questions, which we always try to do. I want to thank these panel members, and I want to especially say they're all friends, but Gene Kimmelman down at the end of the table there, he's an old friend, in both the sense of being a friend for a long time, but as you can see by our white hair, I'll just say we're relatively older than these youngsters here, and I'm glad you were here. Your predecessor, Gigi Sonnet, Public Knowledge, she has actually, I think, been I went back and looked, she's been a panelist at Free State Foundation events more than any of these gentlemen up here. So we were glad that you were with us today. Okay, now what we're going to do, once I tell you to thank these gentlemen again, the buffet is ready right next door. Super buffet, I want you to get your lunch, and then we're going to be starting with Whips Scalise about the time that you're ready for your dessert. So get your lunch. I know Peter Davidson suggested a question for me. If you have other questions you want me to ask, you're welcome to tell me about them. But join me in thanking this panel here.